Hello YouTube, this is Morgan Airspeed Prime here with my next Reckoning of Roku chapter analysis video. This one's going to be for chapter 5, which is called A Visitor. Once again, I'll mention that I do have YouTube channel membership enabled on the channel if you would like to help support the channel so I can do longer running series like this, going through the novels in this level of detail for every chapter. You'll get loyalty badges, custom emojis, and there will be exclusive videos that I also put up as well if you go in at the higher tier. But that's just there if you would like to help support. Otherwise, we'll get into the chapter. So yes, it's called A Visitor, and that visitor refers to Ta Min. So this is the first Ta Min chapter. Really, she was like referenced, I think, in the opening chapter, but we actually get to meet her here properly, and so we get her basically our first time really getting the characterization of Ta Min. This is the only section of the book that she's really in. I think it's this and the kind of follow-up, I think 2 chapters. Might be one more than that, might be one less, I don't remember exactly, but she's here for a few chapters anyway, and I think they do a good job with the characterization of her as effectively her debut, and we'll pretty much just get into it here. It's obviously the idea that Sozin has sent Ta Min to get Roku to go to the island for this mission. That's Sozin's approach, and it's like, ooh, that's a little bit manipulative to a certain degree. That's certainly a choice from Sozin, who knows that Roku likes Ta Min. But let's get into the details here. So we start off and Roku is here sweeping. He's cleaning up the crematorium. This is the task that Sister Daisha has sort of assigned him. Abbot Rabten comes up to him and can see that Roku's kind of struggling with this. This is affecting him a little bit. So does it bother you, cleaning the crematorium given what it's for? And he says it's a bit unnerving. Why is that? Is it all? It's all the death. And we get a bit of air nomad philosophy. It's like, death is a natural part of life. We inhale, we exhale, and it's very spiritual the way they view the death, of course. And he understands this, of course, but it's clear that there is more to it. Like it's literally said here, well, if you do understand, why does it bring you unease? And he doesn't want to answer this, and instead is like, well, at least it hasn't been used in a while. And he dodges the question. And it goes silent here. It's like, okay, clearly something more there overall. And anyway, the reason I'm here is that I need to let you know you have a visitor. And Roku's first response is like, we're in an air temple. How do I have a visitor? How did they get up here? Rather than who. But he then does add in the who, and so the abbot answers. A young woman who found a monk in one of the nearby villages and convinced him to bring her on his sky bison. She said her name was Ta Min. So straight away we get an immediate impression of Ta Min of just like, oh, Sozin just kind of sent her here randomly, and she did some convincing to get her way up into the air temple. So she's clearly, very capable, confident to a certain degree, and we'll see that when she interacts with Roku kind of coming up in a second. We do find out that like Roku's excited to see her, but then the confusion kind of sets in of like, I don't really know her that well. Like I have a crush on her, but we've never really interacted. Because we're both from noble clans, we run in the same social circles, so we know of each other basically, but we've never had a proper, meaningful conversation necessarily. Roku's not been confident enough. He finds her a little bit intimidating. We kind of find out, it says here, too smart, too beautiful, too everything in Roku's mind. And kind of wondering, like, why is she here to a certain degree? The abbot then says, Sister Daisha is basically suggesting we turn her away. Clearly as part of the lessons of detachment of don't read any messages from people from home, don't accept any visitors from home. But Roku's like, I'm not going to do that. It literally says he scoffs at this. So yeah, I'll see her, and yeah, they're going to set up the meeting. So we cut scenes, and then we get the introduction of Ta Min. I'll get up the image here, just so you have the visuals of knowing that we have met the character before from this era. Yes, this is 3 months later, but effectively it is based off her portrayal here in 306. So yeah, she's wearing formal Fire Nation robes layered with crimson, ruby, and pale rose. Her dark brown hair was tied up in a complicated bun, held in place with a pair of intricately carved golden hair sticks, a few strands left free to frame her face. We get the idea. Her grey eyes, and then it's noted here, one of the features that Roku loved most about her was the mole that sat just below the corner of her left eye, which you can see on the screenshot there. Avatar Roku, she greeted, and so we get the introduction here, which is very nice. His immediate kind of thought in his head is sort of the idea of, in a way, what could have been almost. That if he was never revealed to be the Avatar, maybe this could go on to become an actual relationship. There might be a future with Ta Min, but he can't really picture that future being the Avatar. I suppose because he mainly sees years of training ahead of him more so than anything else. She has her own life, and, you know, by the time maybe he has the time to pursue a relationship, will she still be there and kind of single, I suppose, is sort of the idea. And especially with what we get in sort of a second, he's not really holding out hope necessarily, because she's from a noble clan. Why would she be, in a way? So he welcomes her to the Southern Air Temple. We of course find out he's wearing Air Nomad attire here, and her immediate response is, "Oh wow, you're wearing Air Nomad robes. Are they as comfortable as they appear?" And he says, "They're extremely airy, but they don't do much for my figure." And she says, "Well, at least you still have your hair. Didn't they make you shave it all off?" But he explains that avatars often do it when training with the air nomads, but it's not a requirement. Fire avatars traditionally don't. And she notes that, yeah, that makes sense, because this is where we get into sort of like the difference between like what Sister Daisha is trying to teach Roku of like, you know, treat yourself as a spirit of no nation type thing. It doesn't mean like abandon everything that the Fire Nation is. It doesn't mean like ignore fundamentally that you are from the Fire Nation. It's just have a different perspective than that. So this is why like it's okay for him to keep his hair long, because that relates to like a really important kind of ingrained part of Fire Nation culture about like, if they cut their hair too much or shave it all off, it's signified as being this shameful kind of thing, suggesting he has to like atone for something. So that makes sense. Ta Min is just like, Sozin's going to be disappointed at this reveal though. Why is that? He was eager to know if your head was as misshapen as he suspected. And they both laugh, and Roku's like, oh, I miss this type of humor, that this cutting sarcasm from the Fire Nation is the humor he really likes, because he compares it to the air nomad sense of humor, which is, he says, it's like that of small children, laughing at simple, straightforward amusement, wordplay, breaking wind, sky bison calves, winged lemurs tumbling as they played, that sort of thing. They didn't make jokes at the expense of others, even in jest, with the exception of Gyatso, so there's an interesting detail. So, yes, they move on, kind of walking together as they talk. She picks up the conversation. You can see she's quite confident. Before you begin to worry, your parents are healthy and your clan's business affairs are thriving. In fact, doing better than ever since your announcement as the Avatar, effectively. Which, that's also an intriguing kind of thing to know. Of just like, oh yeah, I guess the family of the Avatar would be a kind of like honored family, kind of in a way, regardless of where they are, and they probably would do relatively well for themselves, especially in like a business sense, I guess. So that's interesting. Roku's like, that's good, but realizes, oh yeah, I never really thought about my family. I was just interested to see Ta Min. Now, of course, we realize that, you know, we've basically already been told he doesn't have much of a relationship with his parents, so this is not really to be like unexpected that he's not thinking about them. But he just says, you know, my father must be thrilled. How are your people? They're well too. The conversation kind of peters out, and Ta Min picks it up again, highlighting again the lack of confidence with Sozin. How's the training going? Have you mastered airbending yet? And he's like, it's progressing. Maybe you can take me out on one of those gliders later. I've always wanted to ride one. And he's like, sure. Like, as in, like, you're joking, right? But okay. But then he asks an honest question. He actually, like, steps up a little bit and is like, hey, how's life after graduating from the university? And they go on to explain that the reason he asked this question is because we get revealed here, Ta Min is a firebender, but she made the interesting choice to go to the Fire Nation University rather than the Fire Nation Royal Academy for Girls, which is an interesting detail, I guess, highlighting that, I guess, the firebenders go to the academy because firebending training, I guess, is part of it. Mostly, I guess. But then the university maybe is more for non-benders, but I think we know that, like, Mei and Ty Lee went to the Royal Academy for Girls, but I guess it's just a thing of, like, it's more about the choice that you make. They don't really go into the details necessarily. But it is noted here that this is an interesting point for Roku when it comes to Ta Min, that it was after he had heard about her decision that he divulged his crush on her to Sozin. But she says it's frustrating that basically she has issues with her father, just like Roku has with his. He's stuck in the old ways. He refuses to let me help with the clan businesses. And because he's more obsessed with his eldest daughter is in her blossoming years, so she should be focused on securing the right marriage. And we get to this discussion here of just like, well, your clan is one of the wealthiest in the Fire Nation. That shouldn't be an issue. But she says, generally not, but he seems set on me basically joining the royal family, basically. And Roku's like, Sozin. And he's like, and what do you think about this? And she answers quite quickly. Like, she interrupts him and is just like, I have no intention of marrying before I'm ready. And I'm not ready. Nothing against your friend. He says, you could do worse. And then she looks at Roku and says, I could do better. And it's like, oh, Roku smiles, okay. There's a moment there between the two of them with the idea that, like, okay, clearly he has a crush on her. And I think we know from, like, 306 as well as a scene like this that she clearly likes Roku as well. So just doing a nice job at fleshing out the character of Ta Min. Then we finally get to the actual details here of, like, this is why I'm here. Sozin has asked me to deliver a message. I had to do it in person because it's quite important. No one should hear this, including Fire Lord Taiso. So, then we get to the idea of, yes, what she says is, Sozin has information that the Earth Kingdom has been trying to quietly expand its boundaries ever since before Kyoshi died. So he frames it in a different way. That is not the actual reality of this. He's just using that as a somewhat logical intro to this. Because Roku's like, oh, I've been reading all these kind of scrolls and stuff like that about stuff like the transition time between avatars. This is a time when a lot of people do make take advantage of an opportunity to make some moves in between avatars, but not do anything too much because they don't want to be the first target of the next avatar. And he's like, okay, I'm glad he's keeping me apprised of stuff, but there must be more to it than this. So this is the more detailed thing. Several weeks ago, Fire Nation Patrol discovered an Earth Kingdom military presence in Fire Nation territory. They're trying to steal one of our outer islands. So straight away, that's not the truth. There was no Fire Nation Patrol, unless Sozin's referring to himself in that way, but he doesn't mention that here. Which island? An unnamed one in the Subuyan chain to the south, small enough that it doesn't appear on most maps. It's mentioned here, a handful of uncontacted natives. Sozin wants you to go there and persuade the Earth Kingdom to leave and relinquish their claim, and he thinks the Avatar is particularly suited to resolve this peacefully. So obviously we know Sozin has power is more of the reason that he wants this to happen here, but this is a somewhat reasonable explanation. But of course he has left out some details here, quite notably. So he thinks about this quite a bit, because on one hand, he's like, this is correct. It's a fire island. We can't just let the Earth Kingdom steal territory from another nation. There's that, the pride of the Fire Nation. He has to sort of stand up for that to a certain degree. Especially because, the Fire Lord is kind of really into the whole outer island rebellions, trying to deal with it. So, of course, every bit of land is important to the Fire Nation. But the other problem is, of course, that the first thing the Avatar does is a mission that helps the Fire Nation, he knows that that kind of looks a little bit bad if that's in fact what he's kind of stepping up to do. So that's the kind of other side of things that he's trying to kind of think about. It feels like, okay, well, I guess I kind of maybe should get involved in this because it is a dispute between nations, but like, it seems minor enough, and should I really step in for the first time with this? I don't know. Roku asks Tom in, like, what do you think? And she says, you know, if this is part of some larger design, letting the Earth Kingdom military remain on our islands uncontested could make them more confident and aggressive down the road. Still, it's a delicate situation. He says, okay, what would you do? If I believed I could peacefully convince the Earth Kingdom to leave, I would. And otherwise, I would leave it up to Prince Sozin. And he's like, oh, okay. He's thinking about it, like, could I do anything here? I'm not really sure. I don't want to cause an incident first time round. Daisha probably wouldn't want me to do it either. But he decides, he makes his decision here. I'm sorry, I can't. She asks, you know, may I ask why? And he says, I need to focus on my training. And so he understands, but he's like, okay, I'll keep a close eye on the Earth Kingdom, and if anything else does happen, I'll step in. And she's like, okay, I'll send this report back. And he's like, I'm sorry that it's not a positive. I know Sozin's going to be unhappy. But this is where we get into the other side of Tommen, and it says here, like, it's good practice me having to deliver like a bad message. Why? Because it's practice for being a diplomat. That's what I want to do with my education. Prince Sozin promised to let me begin apprenticing as one after I delivered this message to you. And Roku's like, if the future Fire Lord deems it a fitting profession for you, who are your parents to disagree? So she's kind of planning, and like, this is how she's going to get her kind of job, her kind of career going, and not and move away, I suppose, from the father's focus on the marriage. So that's an interesting one. There's a nice little detail here of, like, as they walked, the sides of their shoulders pressed together, neither moved away. And Roku does say, a little bit more confident here, I'm glad he chose you to bring me this message. And she says, me too. He does say, like, why don't you stay for a few days? You know, the food's nothing to write home about, but the air nomads are gracious hosts and the views are spectacular. And she agrees. So Tommen is going to stay at the Southern Air Temple for a little bit. He tells her about some of the scrolls that he's read, and he thinks she'll like some of the stuff that the air nomads have also. She does say, I always suspected you were secretly a scroll worm, even if you did spend most of your time shirtless sparring with Sozin. So there's a little bit of back and forth about that. She does say, okay, I'll send a quick message, kind of coded, basically cryptic, back to Sozin, and we'll get on with things. He jokes, of course, like, oh, tell him that I shaved my head and it's as beautiful as a dragon egg. And she's like, nah, I'm not gonna say that. So Tommen walks off. Daisha comes over and is basically like, your friend will make a formidable diplomat someday. And Roku realizes, oh, how much of that did you hear? And she's like, enough. Secret airbending eavesdropping technique. And she says something like that. And he asks her, like, did I make the right decision refusing this? She says, yeah, it was wise to not involve yourself in a minor territorial dispute between nations, even if the request came from a close friend. And he's like, oh, does that mean I'm ready to learn airbending? Like, have I detached properly? And she says, nearly. But in your final assurance to the young lady, you referred to our people and our land when speaking of the Fire Nation. And he's like, oh, I see. And he does get, like, the point that she's trying to make. It's a simple mistake, doesn't really mean anything, but it's like, okay, I do see the point that you are making. And then suddenly, out of absolutely nowhere, a pie falls from the sky, and an air nomad, an airbender statue is hit nearby, but not Roku or Sister Daisha. They get hit with some of the debris, but not the actual full thing. And Roku to Daisha is like, can you please tell him to stop trying to hit me with pies? And she's just like, no, it's harmless airbending practice. And she steps over to the statue and dips her finger into the filling and is like, candied jackfruit. And then she shouts up to Gyatso and is like, your aim needs work, but your recipe is coming along. So it's very much the Air Nomad style of things, of like, yeah, they love these jokes, these practical jokes and stuff like that, whereas Roku's a bit like, this is not my style, but okay. So Gyatso's always loved throwing pies. That's I suppose one thing we learn here. He's in the chapter, but he's not really in the chapter. His pies are in the chapter, which is a fun little reference there. But that is how the chapter ends. So obviously we have the idea of like, wait, he's just refused the mission, but Ta Min is going to stay here for a little bit, and then obviously we get the idea that she is sending a message of Roku's answer back like immediately. So the idea is what eventually will convince Roku to go on this mission, and how's the relationship with Ta Min going to develop from this point on? Because we know obviously they're not going to get married until like 12 years from now, I think it is. Because it's relatively shortly, I think, after Roku completes his training. But it's interesting to know that they actually did have a proper meeting. They spend some time together here right at the start of his training as well, which is interesting. So mainly, like I said, a chapter that is focused on the idea of like, okay, here's Ta Min as a character, and you actually get to find out stuff about her that is not just sort of girl Roku has a crush on who is also from nobility. Like the fact that you find out that, oh, she's actually quite confident, quite resourceful, getting to the air temple, how she's able to just so effortlessly talk with Roku, and handle the conversation when he's kind of struggling a little bit. You of course find out that she actually does sort of like him as well. The focus of like, she seems to have planned out sort of her life, her career a little bit more, going to the university first, but now getting into a situation where she wants to be a diplomat going forward. Which I guess if that's what she goes on to do, potentially gives her the option of interacting with Roku on behalf of the Fire Nation quite a bit more as the kind of years go on. So maybe that's how they kind of keep in touch over the years, and eventually kind of maybe why they do get married shortly after Roku's training is over. But that's an interesting little detail overall. Obviously, the bit at the start about sort of Roku and sort of like the location of a funeral is more set up for like when we eventually get the Yasu kind of reveal, kind of halfway through the book ish. But we are getting towards that stuff. Otherwise, it's a nice character-focused chapter. So in the comments, let me know what your thoughts are on this, our proper introduction to Ta Min as a character. What did you think of her? We're going to get more in the coming chapters, but for now, what are your thoughts? But that has been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.